Although the Ethiopians resisted colonialism, they embraced the modernization of their empire. This modernization ultimately created an antithetical approach to their independence. During the same period, the Italians' absence of an expansive empire and their desire for power and control under the dictator Mussolini caused them to seek control in East Africa. The Italians were of the mindset that an Ethiopian colony would award them with prolonged power and glory. Ethiopia's colonial period was not taken passively by the Patriot resistance, as they undertook desperate measures to hinder the course of Italian and British colonization. Thus they appealed to the League of Nations, but with little success, and the Patriots then began to use guerrilla tactics to protect their historic philosophy of maintaining their sovereignty. World War II saw an alliance between the British and Italians broken, and thus resulted in the British aiding the liberalization of Ethiopia. However, it then became apparent that Ethiopians relied on outside involvement for their modernization to continue, which conflicted with their desire of independence. Ethiopia was self-determined to develop its empire to European standards, yet the overpowering interference of Italy interrupted this progress. Before the Ethiopian War, Haile Selassie, the Negus of Ethiopia, was on the trajectory to modernization. Selassie's aim was to produce a revitalized and renewed state through significant advancements in Ethiopia's societal makeup. This saw the implementation of a constitution, which was a progressive statement that established a framework for modern government. However, Selassie's plans were obstructed by the conflicting aspirations of Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy who wished to expand the Italian empire.
The Italy of the Black Shirt Revolution, rise to your feet. Let the cry of your determination rise to the skies and reach our soldiers in East Africa. It is the cry of Italy which goes beyond the mountains and the seas out into the great world. It is the cry of justice and of victory.
Mussolini's proclamation was preceded by the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, which was ridden by Mussolini.
Our cause in Ethiopia is a just one. In a few days it will be laid before the League's Council. It will be laid before the whole world. Proof that the Ethiopians are a barbaric people, sunk in the practice of slavery.
This gave the impression that Italy's interest in Ethiopia was strictly a civilizing mission, not unlike the one seen by other European powers in the scramble for Africa. In response to this, Selassie, in his world broadcast on September 7, 1935, voiced the opinion of his people.
The Ethiopian people are firmly attached to peace, but they are at the same time animated by a deep love of country. Whatever may be the state of disarmament in which they unjustly find themselves through the diplomatic maneuvers of Italy, our people are jealous of their independence and know how and will use even swords and spears in defense of the acres they have cultivated and which they love.
It was inevitable that conflict would arise between Italy and Ethiopia, as there was no common ground for them to establish peace. Thus, the Italo-Ethiopian War was a battle between man and machine, which resulted in the unavoidable Italian occupation of Ethiopia. At this time, the League of Nations, however, held the power to inhibit Italian advances in Ethiopia, and were able to provide the necessary protection for Ethiopian modernization to go unhampered. The League governed through the use of sanctions with the main objective of lasting peace. All League members were pledged to protect the territorial integrity of other member states, although they failed to do this in the Italian-Ethiopian context. The powers of the League were distracted in pre-war negotiations to protect Ethiopia from Italian imperialism. In particular, the British and French were intimidated by Mussolini and the measures he would resort to for Ethiopia to come under Italian rule.
War, it would not be my choice, but the League of Nations. Whoever applies sanctions against Italy will meet the armed hostility of my people.
The British and French, who were trying to integrate Italy into Allied powers, offered territorial accessions and Italian economic primacy in Ethiopia as incentive for Italy to become an ally. By doing so, the League disregarded their fundamental sanctions and the correlated appeal from Selassie.
I, Haile Selassie, Emperor of Ethiopia, am present here today to ask for the imperial justice due to my people, and for the help which 52 nations had undertaken to extend to it when they affirmed 8 months ago that a war of aggression in violation of international law was being waged against Ethiopia. I asked the 52 nations who have given a promise to the Ethiopian people that they would come to their aid at the time of the aggression against them in order to prevent the aggressor from defeating them. I asked the 52 nations for their support by upholding this promise. What are you willing to do for Ethiopia?
British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain reflects on the consequences the League's unsuccessful sanctions had on Italy.
There was hardly any country to which it appeared that a policy of sanctions could be exercised with a greater chance of success than upon Italy. Rather, it has failed to prevent war, failed to stop war, failed to save the victim of the aggression.
The League was now seen as a useless fraud, which was unable to provide collective security, which in Ethiopia's case meant that the desire of self-determined modernization and the nation's autonomy was now unfeasible. As a result of the League's ineffective sanctions, Italy was able to colonize Ethiopia without consequence. Seleucus recognized the League's failure and knew that in order to put an end to the most sweeping, the most unjust, and the most inhumane war of modern times, he must leave in exile. Thus it appeared that the Ethiopian government structure had collapsed, which allowed Italian troops to enter the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. Mussolini expressed his jubilation and his interest in the annexing of Ethiopia on May 5, 1936.
During the 30 centuries of her history, Italy has lived many memorable hours. This is certainly the most solemn. I announce to the world that the war is finished and peace re-established. It is necessary I should add that is our peace, a Roman peace, which is expressed in these terms, the final and definite terms, Ethiopia is Italian. The people of the line of Judah have shown clearly they wish to live under the tutelage of the Italian people.
Ethiopian resistance, however, did not end, and whilst the Italians tried to consolidate their power, they were met with persistent guerrilla patriot forces established by Seleucus. This made any kind of absolute Italian civilizing mission impractical. After Yekata 12, an indiscriminate massacre of Ethiopians, conciliatory methods were initiated by Italian forces which saw development goals being established. The Italians had spurred growth along lines already evident before the occupation, creating a more complex, larger and better organized economy and infrastructure to exploit the satisfaction of high wartime demand for Ethiopia's produce. It was against Ethiopian belief to ever accept Italian colonialism, as the development efforts were not of their own origin. In consequence, the Ethiopian fight for independence would continue until they regained their sovereignty. With the declaration of World War II, circumstances were favourable for an overthrow of Italian colonialism in Ethiopia. This was because of the strategic possibilities Ethiopia could provide for those opposed to Germans. The solicitous British government saw the liberation of Ethiopia as a way of securing the Suez Canal's Red Sea flank from the Axis. Seleucus' appeal for British aid and protection was initially ignored by the British, but due to the war was later granted.
But our hopes and our thought is to bring our country into a higher civilization and to tie it with benefit both to our country and to England, either in the form of a protectorate or in the form of a mandate, without touching our independence, and to work for the development of the country which is our own.
Consequently, Ethiopia was liberated from the Italians by the British, but to only have its sovereignty again withheld. The British failed to recognise Ethiopia's sovereignty until progress was made in 1942 in the form of the Anglo-Ethiopian Agreement, which would endure for 2 years. Anthony Eden, the British Foreign Secretary, on 4th of February 1941, expressed the conditions of this agreement.
His Majesty's government would welcome the reappearance of an independent Ethiopian state and recognises the claim of the Emperor Haile Selassie to the throne. The Emperor has also asked us for a military mission to assist him in the reorganisation of his armed forces. The Emperor has asked, too, for some British judges in his courts to assist him in the administration of justice. His Majesty's government have not sought to profit by the Ethiopian campaign at the expense of the independence of Ethiopia. They are glad to have been able to play a part in securing the restoration of Ethiopian liberties.
Selassie was suspicious of the British and the desired extent of involvement in Ethiopia's government and military. Ironically, this led to a cooperation between the Ethiopians and Italians, because of the Italian technical skills, the need of Italian military know-how, and also because their advice would enable the Ethiopians to negotiate on better terms with the British military authorities. Ethiopians utilized Italian advice and the goodwill of the United States to negotiate a more favorable treaty with the British in 1944. The British waived their right to diplomatic precedence, abandoned their military privileges. The treaty also placed the head of the British military mission under the Ethiopian Minister of War's control. From here, Selassie continued the modernization of his empire using his pre-war model, but with financial aid from outside sources such as Britain and also the United States. Thus, the Ethiopian government became reliant on the aid of these two nations, and consequently, its independence suffered. The self-determined modernization of Ethiopia was so coveted by its people that resistance to colonialism was inevitable. At the same time, Mussolini sought the historic glory of his nation through the acquisition of African lands and consequently initiated the interruption of Ethiopia's sovereignty. Ethiopia was not assisted by the international government body, the League of Nations, as the inability to regulate sanctions for peace led to an unsanctioned Italian colonial regime in Ethiopia. However, this Italian occupation was met with a patriot resistance that did not accept defeat. In addition, with the onset of World War II and an unstable political global climate, the Ethiopians were given the opportunity, with the help of the British, to conquest their own sovereignty. Unfortunately, however, Ethiopia's sovereignty was untenable due to a prolonged British involvement, and ultimately leading to reliance on external aid and direction. Despite the fact that colonialism disrupted the Ethiopian quest for modernization, its government became aware that its country required a model for development, which could only be found in external sources. This produced an antithetical attitude where independence would be compromised for modernization.